Welcome back to the IRTV studios at IRX, and it's a great pleasure to have Ben with me from BStock. Ben, tell everyone who you are and what BStock does.
So I'm the EMEA Director for BStock Solutions. We're a Silicon Valley based business, about 8 years old. We originated out of eBay, private company now. Separated, as I say, around about 8 years ago. I run the European business for BStock, and what do? In essence, we're a connector of buyers and sellers of liquidation and problem inventory.
See, it sounds so slick when you say it. Now, what was really exciting for me is when I saw last year you giving a demonstration of the platform. And in a way, this is like eBay at wholesale volumes for old stock, end-of-life, disposal stock.
Yeah. So the best way to think about what we do is we're exactly as you said, we're a marketplace company. We build and operate private marketplaces. So by that, we're not a single website business. We operate an ecosystem of individual marketplaces that we operate on behalf of clients. Some of them are larger than others. We work for 9 of the top 10 US retailers. In fact, I think the only one we don't work for is Apple. We've got some smaller specialist retailers, but in essence, what we do is we provide them with an environment through which they can manage the disposal of their problem inventory in a way that suits their business rather than suits ours.
Right, so in the old days of last century, once the inventory was no longer current stock or was being discounted or promoted, it sort of wasn't the problem of the trading people, and it was quietly set off to a jobber, dumped in a skip, recycled, whatever. So why should somebody now extend the life cycle of a product and trade it on a marketplace?
Well, there are a number of different reasons. I mean, and there are all sorts of driving factors in why this has now become more of an issue. I mean, fundamentally, retailers are a forward-looking business. Everything's about next week, next year, next season. The problem that we solve is specifically what I call a rear-view mirror or an over-the-shoulder problem. It's stuff in the warehouse that's either not been sold or it's come back because it's an e-com return which can't be reprocessed and put into stock. And it's something that most retailers fundamentally just aren't very good at dealing with. But obviously, as you've got to shift from retail on the high street to a more omni-channel or digital first, I think is the current trend. As more and more businesses are driving more and more sales online, there's an inevitability that you're going to get a percentage of that stock back, and there's an inevitability that some of it cannot be resold. So then the question is, well, what do you do with it? Typically you would have dealt with, as you've called it, a jobber. Our colleagues in the US call it a liquidator. That's not a term that goes down well in the UK, particularly bearing in mind what's going on the high street at the moment. But in essence, what used to happen is these guys would roll up and they would say, well, look, we'll solve this problem for you because we'll just take it away. Look, we'll give you next to nothing for it, but we'll solve the immediate problem of getting this stuff out of the warehouse and get it out of your way. All that they ever did was take it away, chop it up into smaller parcels, and then resell it on into the secondary market. Now, what we do as a business, quite simply, is that we remove the need for retailers to deal with these traders anymore because we connect their stock directly into what we call the secondary market.
I'm assuming you also then reconnect the retailer with the margin that the liquidators, jobbers would take. So you're recovering a significant retail margin for the retailer.
Absolutely.
Or the manufacturer.
Absolutely. So what we know for a fact is that most retailers, as I said earlier on, just aren't very good at solving this problem. And solving this problem includes actually selling it. What we know is that most retailers are leaving money on the table because they're relying on a very small network of buyers to solve this problem for them, where actually what you're doing is relying on their ability to pay. What we do is actually diversify that buyer base, by making sure that there are enough people that are interested in this stock so that they actually compete for it. And not only that, so you're not relying on a small group of buyers, you're relying on, you've got a bigger buyer base that have got deeper pockets.
But so they go from, in a way, losing control of their brand. I give it to the jobber, it could end up anywhere, any market, any place, any disposal. In your case, the customers who are maybe familiar with eBay, familiar with marketplaces, are seeing this stock as still live and being sold. How do you manage the brand issues, the warranty implications, maybe even who want to return? So how do you manage that whole side of my reputation if I hand you my end of season stuff?
So that's a great question. And there are a number of different perspectives that you can take from this. If I go right back to the original scenario where there's a reliance on the jobber who's going to buy this stock and sort this problem out for you, typically it's come with a, don't worry, we'll make sure it isn't sold in anywhere that's going to cannibalise your sales. The reality of life is that there was never actually a lot of
You couldn't police it.
You can't police it. If I talk to retailers and say, look, how do you police this thing now? Because obviously brand reputation is and should be a primary consideration. But when you delve a little deeper and say, well, what are the processes that you've actually got in place now? Fundamentally, it's actually coming down to, well, we've worked with this small group of buyers and generally they promise us that they will make sure that this doesn't become a problem. Obviously, as more and more stock comes onto the secondary markets, compliance and brand protection issues start to become more and more relevant. And I think one of the things that we realised very early on was that by digitising this process, actually you're making it completely transparent. Good and bad. There are some downsides to being completely transparent because not everything, not everything sells at the price that you would want it to sell at every single time. But that's the nature of a market. But fundamentally, transparency brings with it a number of different benefits. And so when you're talking from a brand perspective, we can actually control who are in the marketplaces and how that inventory is resold. That can be part of the deal in terms of the way that we operate it. And then when you go a little bit further and you dig into it, there are corporate social responsibilities in terms of businesses just can't landfill stuff anymore. No. And I expect to see over the coming years that there will be a drive in legislation where retailers, OEMs are going to be compelled to make sure that as much value is extracted out of this problem inventory as is possible. And rather than just saying, okay, let's just throw it away, or we'll job it off and we'll see what happens. They're going to be legally compelled, and at that point, transparency then starts to become a real issue.
And this ties in with the drive to move away from just the transaction to the customer, their lifetime value, a long-term relationship with them. So in a way, you'd expect products to last longer, and the manufacturer, the retailer, to be more responsible for them throughout the whole of the sales cycle. As well as the life cycle and lifetime.
Absolutely, and what great example of that at the moment is this current battle in the smartphone market. You will see, everybody will know that there's new versions of iPhones and Samsung's competing inventories out there, competing products, I should say. There's been a slowdown in the take-up of these phones because of the high spec of the phones that are still out there. But fundamentally, you've got a load of stock out in the marketplace. These phones will get handed in eventually. They can't just be sold off or scrapped or thrown away. But we've got some stats that actually show that iPhones, I think, will normally go through now three or four sets of ownership before they actually become completely redundant. And that trend, I think, is going to continue in all sorts of spheres, whether it's consumer electronics, whether it's fashion. I think you'll start to see it in things like cars, where auto parts start to become reused. There's going to be a continual drive to make sure that there's value taken out of it as far down the value chain as possible.
And for our younger viewers, cars are those things your parents used to own, but you now just rent and leave on the side of the street. So, Ben, thanks for joining us. Just in case you're wondering what the link is just underneath this, we're doing a white paper at the moment looking at the growth of secondary markets, how they fit in with managing your product life cycle, your brand interaction with your customers, as well as recovering some of the money that maybe we weren't looking at, the rear view mirror, as Ben put it. So do complete our survey and download the white paper in due course. In the meantime, Ben, thanks so much for joining us.
Welcome.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.